Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the Security Break podcast. I'm Giorgio, and this is a little project of mine where I invite cool people like Jeff today from the cybersecurity space to have a chat and discuss about some of the recent security stories. And the goal is to basically learn something in the process, exchanging some ideas, some thoughts, and hopefully it could be helpful to you as well that are watching this live, but it will be also available on the YouTube channel after it. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me today. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself to our following?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I'm Jeff White. I'm an author and investigative journalist, and I cover organized crime and technology. So whether organized crime and tech cross over, that's where I tend to cover. So yes, things like computer hacking, but also fraud and cartel drug dealing and money laundering and so on. And I've just written a new book, which is going to be out in June, which is called Rinsed. And it's about money laundering and how technology is changing the world of money laundering, which underpins a lot of the cybercrime, of course, that we see going on in the world.
That's great. Also, because we during this podcast we often discuss about the crypto world, how that's used by cybercrime. So that's exactly in line with the with our topics here. And you are also I know you also wrote a couple of books before this, which are also very interesting. So I encourage everyone to have a look at those and never read those. I'm currently thinking about possibly have a format later where we can actually comment books like yours. So maybe that could be an idea for another time.
Sure. Yeah.
Great. That said, so this is the plan. We collected a bunch of articles from the last week or so. I'm gonna share my screen so everyone can see it. Here we go. That's the one. Perfect. And I'm going to introduce the article first, and then we basically have a discussion on it and see what we have to say about this.
Sure.
The first one, this was pretty big in the news, in the last few days, or at least all of the big companies announcing all of the new AI-powered tools, features, and so on and so forth. But we're going to focus on a very specific one announced by Microsoft. And this is part of their, they call it Copilot Plus PCs. So basically some kind of AI-powered laptops they're gonna sell in the market. In a specific feature that's gonna be part of it called Recall. This is very interesting for me specifically because of my job, but I think it has a lot of different consequences that should interest anyone. This feature is going to basically record a lot of information that the user does on his own laptops, right? And part of this information is going to record are actually screenshots of your own screen and what you're doing with it, and all of the applications, all of the content you are viewing, anything you are really doing online or offline, really. Of course, this was let's say heavily questioned, heavily commented online because of privacy concerns. Even though Microsoft is reassuring everyone, saying that this is going to be recorded only locally to your PC, not being sent online to the Microsoft Cloud or anything like that. Still, that's a lot of information that's going to record, and the concern is, I think it's legitimate, right? So I'm gonna stop right there, and I want to see, to hear what were your first thoughts when you read this. What did you think about?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, Microsoft is pushing very, very heavily into the AI space, and Copilot is one of its sort of big products that it's trying to integrate everywhere into its estate, trying to integrate this AI stuff. Um, I was quite perplexed by this story because obviously the idea of screenshots of my content being taken by Microsoft's Copilot Plus software and then potentially sent off and shared somewhere and stored somewhere is deeply concerning. But then, as you pointed out, Giorgio, the article goes on to say that these screenshots are stored locally on the machine. And I think the article, certainly on the BBC that I read, said that in order for a malicious actor, a hacker, to get access to them, they need to get access to the machine, in which case, well, they have access to your computer so they can take their own screenshots. I mean, obviously, being able to come across a store of Microsoft stored screenshots would be useful. But, you know, really, if an attacker has to get to your computer to kind of get the information, that's quite a heavy ask. But then what occurred to me was, well, what's the point then of this? Is the idea of this to have a sort of archive that I, as a user, am supposed to be able to look back at so that I can see what I've done and where I've been, a sort of history, you know, on steroids thing, like a browser history, but much, much better because everything on my computer. Then I thought, well, surely what Microsoft must be doing is using this to train the AI, because part of AI's problem is getting fresh data and getting fresh material in. And this would obviously be a fantastic store of fresh material, constant screenshots of what people are doing online. But then if Microsoft is saying that's only stored locally on the machine, Microsoft can't pull any of that data and process it and use it to train their AIs. So what's going on here? You know, if it is stored locally, what's the point of it? Microsoft doesn't get anything out of it, and I can't really see what I get out of it as a user. I don't know, Giorgio, whether you read deeper and have the answers to those questions.
Well, I surely spent some time in reading, the Microsoft page talking about, this feature, but of course, it's not really going in deep on the, technicalities. I
Hmm.
have a couple of guesses here. My first guess is that, all of the new features, announced not only by Microsoft but also from the other big tech companies, it's about the ability of the AI features to recognize items and elements in an image or in a video, right? Even
Hmm.
live. So my guess here is that if you want to as a user of these new laptops, if you want to get a history of what you were doing, but you don't really remember the name of the file or the
Right.
name of the page you were visiting, maybe you can just ask, AI, can you help me remember what
Hmm.
was that page with that kind of
Right.
image in it?
Yeah.
So, so,
What
so
what
that's
was
what
I
I'm guessing.
what was I looking at last week that was talking about, you know, ham sandwiches or something?
Yeah.
But then, but
You
then
know, the recipe.
that begs the question. So, if to take that example, imagine I was looking at a recipe site, and then a week later, I asked, um, I don't know whether it's still called Cortana, but whatever Microsoft's AI assistant now is called, and I say, "What was the recipe I was looking at last week on the BBC website or whatever?" Now, in order for the artificial intelligence software to answer that question, it's got to go to the store of information and find that web page and bring it up and say, "Hey, Jeff, last week you looked at these pages and this is a recipe one," and so on. All of that processing would, in order for Microsoft's argument to be correct, that this is all stored locally and there's no data issues about the data being sent off, all that activity, that processing and that storage of data would have to happen on my laptop. Are they saying that's the case? I suspect that's not the case. I suspect that your laptop will call out to a cloud computer somewhere to take care of the processing power to process all the pages you looked at and then give you the answer. So the question is, well, the ultimate thing would be, if I unplug my laptop from the internet, can I still use this ability to look at my history and to get the data up? That would be the acid test. Because if so, that could be quite useful. But as I say, I don't see what Microsoft's gaining out of that, because at some stage Microsoft has to get all this data to train its algorithms to be better. I'd be stunned if it would work all offline, put it that way.
I perfectly agree with you, and I had this same, question in my head. Like, not only from the processing, but I'm wondering. Okay, I'm gonna buy a new laptop. It's gonna be, the very last fancy thing from Microsoft, and like in few months, the storage will be full of my own screenshots. because I don't know how much of them or how
Yeah.
many of them or how big will be the quality of those screenshots. But still,
Mm.
that's a huge let's say impact for the storage as well. So even I am struggling with believing this is not going to be pushed somewhere in the cloud, let's say.
That's interesting because there's a strange link actually to North Korea on this, which I think we'll probably come to again later. So in North Korea, there was an amazing article about mobile phones in North Korea. Obviously, North Korea is sealed off. The regime is extremely secretive. It doesn't really want people to have mobile phones, and certainly not to have access to the internet or the outside world. And so they put spyware effectively on the phones, was the accusation in the article. And this spyware would do exactly what Copilot Plus and Microsoft are talking about. It took screenshots of what was on the phones. And the problem was the phone started then to malfunction because, as you say, the storage just filled up with all of these screenshots. And so people were getting these phones. They couldn't understand why they were slowing down and not usable. And it turns out it's because there was a huge cache of hidden memory that the North Korean government had done. Not that I'm comparing Microsoft to North Korea, obviously, although so others might.
I mean, this is actually a very, very good point because, we, for people in the security industry, we always see this challenge in identifying real compromises, because the new technology, the new legitimate technologies are let's say always getting similar features compared to the one of malwares and similar software, right? If you think about if you think about deepfake, that we are actually going to talk in a few minutes, that's something that legitimate companies are doing for, let's say, legitimate purposes, but also, of course, malicious actors are using and are going to use for other purposes. So the thing is, of course, it's always like, okay, we're building tools as a society, and of course, tools can be used for both benign and bad reasons. We just probably need to be aware of that, and we probably have the same consequences, no matter if you have a good or bad purpose. Which is the reason why it's difficult to believe the announcements in all of the details, let's say.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, what Microsoft's announced here is kind of spyware. It would be classed as spyware if you weren't, authorized installing it. The other thing about this is, transparency for users. Yes, Microsoft has announced this, but how visible is the setting to turn this on or off? I think it should be a choice. And it does annoy me when, companies install stuff and just don't give you the option. There was an amazing feature I found that I wasn't aware of on Windows, where if it spotted a Wi-Fi, I had this thing where I was sitting in my office one day and the Wi-Fi was trying to connect on my laptop to some network that I'd never connected to. And it turned out there was a setting in Microsoft where if there was a sort of free and available Wi-Fi hotspot, it would automatically try to connect to it. And I just thought, why would you build that feature in? And also, why didn't you tell me? Because I would turn that off, because I connecting to insecure Wi-Fi networks is exactly the thing that I tell people not to do. And so I don't mind companies building these features in. I just think enabling them by default from the get-go is a bad idea. And so with this Copilot screen scraping, recall tool, where's the setting? How visible is it? And can we have it off by default and then turned on? Because otherwise you're just pushing people into effectively authorized spyware through the back door.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? We're basically talking about secure by design or similar aspects of our industry. The thing that the most secure configuration should be the default one. And if I want to accept the risk, I need myself to take the decision and do something to enable it, which is not most of the time. It's not the case, basically, because of course companies want to push their own new features and don't want to put any friction in that, because that's a UX user experience thing, right? If I need to enable something, maybe I will not, and maybe I will not discover the feature. So it's a never-ending challenge.
The other thing I've just thought of actually is from a sort of extortion or blackmail point of view and a sextortion point of view. We've obviously had these sextortion cases where hackers and extortionists will say, well, I've got private pictures of you, intimate photographs of you. Well, as a way to make that a more realistic threat, you could say to somebody, look at this recall stash of photos. You can see on there everything you've ever done on your computer is stored. I've got access to that and I know what you've done. So as a sort of extortionist, it actually potentially gives me a way to convince the person, even if I don't have the intimate photographs of them, I can show them where it's all stored on their computer and make them think that I've got access to that. So I'm thinking of malicious, I probably shouldn't be talking about this. I'm thinking malicious ways to use this, but it is, again, it should be turned off by default, as you say, security by design, turned off by default, and then turned on if you want your entire computer use history stored in a folder somewhere. And again, I don't mind that, but where's the folder and can I password protect it? What's the deal there? So yeah, lots of questions.
I mean, that's probably the most interesting thing for me, right? Let's say that we blindly trust Microsoft. Okay, this is going to be the most secure way it can be implemented and deployed to our laptops. The thing is, it still involves a lot of let's say third-party risks. Okay, so let's say Microsoft doesn't collect anything, so we don't have to bother about Microsoft itself. But what if my laptop will be compromised eventually by a third party, by a threat actor? That means that by default, potentially, they're going to collect a lot of more information that they will do without this new feature, right?
Yeah.
And we have to remember that this is okay. Maybe screenshot for most of people is not a big deal, but let's remember that it's going to collect the, let's say, pages that you're visiting. If you're doing a video call, it's going to record actually your image and third party persons and people images and voices, okay, which once again we're going to talk about in a few seconds. And that's a lot of data that could potentially be compromised and be misused or exploited if someone else is going to collect the same information. The other aspect is for let's say a good part of it, I will say, computer investigations involving maybe law enforcement, right?
Yeah.
And this, for your information, this is kind of my my daily job. And the thing that I will have not only metadata available to investigate, a compromise or to investigate a crime, and I can actually see exactly what the user or anyone who was using the computer can see or did in the past. It's a lot of data, and it's a lot of interesting data also for that scenario.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, no, yeah, that's a good point. Actually, it would be useful for forensics purposes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Microsoft is also mentioning the fact that the screenshot will be encrypted and will be stored securely. We don't really know exactly how and how how good will be that encryption. If that means just that whenever I put my user credential in there, will be actually clear text, or that's going to be something that is really hidden even by from the user itself. That's probably the best thing to do, but I don't really know how to interpret this.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, if it's encrypted but decrypted when I enter my Windows password when I log into the machine, that's not great encryption. I'd expect to to have to enter my password a second time, or perhaps create another password for this. And I certainly, as the user of the machine, would absolutely want to know where this data is stored. A, so I could delete it, but B, so I could check on it and see what the encryption standard is. And also the fact that the fact that you, Giorgio, have looked at this and still haven't got the answer to these questions is just not good enough. There should be a rolling Q&A with Microsoft where they answer these questions in basic terms that we can all understand before they roll this shit out. It just stuns me that companies just don't do that. The questions we're asking are not like difficult, insane, weird questions. They're just basic questions that you would come up with chatting around the dinner table. So shouldn't Microsoft have got the answers and put them online? In fairness, I haven't done much to sort of look for it, but it sounds like you have, and I'm disturbed that we're still in the dark here.
I mean, what I'm really interesting about is, whenever this feature will be actually out and we will have laptops out there, I want to see the first researches, from third parties that are going to test what Microsoft is really saying, because we know that, technically they could do everything in the best way possible, but still there could have, there could be some bugs, some vulnerabilities that could be enable anyone to exploit them. So that's going to be a very interesting new era, let's say, of Microsoft computers. Let's remember that, basically the entire planet has mostly Windows laptops right now. This is probably the last thing I want to mention here. this kind of new features in laptops, it's basically following the line of the recent smartphones, right? Because I think a lot of smartphones, both from Apple and Android, um, have a lot of new AI enabled features that are,
Mm.
for me at least, have similar privacy concerns,
Yeah.
but it's going to become, in my point of view, something that is globally accepted. Just because we want the features, or we just know that we are buying it for the features,
Mm.
once again the privacy concern is gonna be lower and lower, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see.
Mm.
It's always interesting to see the development, let's say, of new technology and the consequences.
Yes.
Okay. So anything else about this one before we jump into the next one, Jeff? Do you have anything
I
else in mind?
yeah, I think I've vented vented
Okay.
my consternation and confusion over this. So yeah.
No, that's actually very appreciated. The thing is, I often say this, but the big and good questions not always have a really an answer yet, right?
Yeah.
So it's good to have the discussion and to think about it, and maybe someone else in the comments can give us their opinion, or just their point of views, which could also be very interesting. Cool. So let's jump to the next news for today's episode, which is, I mean, it's not a real one. So we add some new developments, but this is something we already covered in the past.
Mm.
We're talking about, UK company called, I don't know how to spell this. It's Arab, Arab.
Arup,
I'm not
yeah,
sure.
big building and construction type firm, I think Arup. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is that, the fact was already known, but we didn't know what was the company affected by this. Basically,
Mm.
it was a deep fake scam, or let's say phishing attack that convinced some of their employees in Hong Kong, I think, yes,
Yeah.
to basically send multiple different how do you call it, wires,
Yeah.
basically
Well,
sending money to malicious actors, right? And they convinced the employee, um, masquerading themselves, misleading them, because the deepfake was really creating the image of some senior
yeah.
people in the company, right? So this is, I'm really interested in this topic because I talk to a lot of people who are not in the industry and read some of this news, and are, of course, afraid. They are scared about this kind of deep fake attacks. You know, I can recognize maybe an email, but if someone calls me and I see a face of my, I don't know, a relative, or maybe my employer, I don't know if I can really, find out that this is a malicious kind of attempt or attack. And well, I, of course, I want to see your point of view first, but I have some ideas in my mind that I definitely want to mention. So,
Mm.
first, your thoughts. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, it's a fascinating story. And as you say, there was talk this had happened, and now we know the name of the company. I think from the article, it was the Financial Times who actually got the scoop on who the company was. In a
I
way,
think so.
interesting as that is, to link it to a particular company, as you say, the methodology remains the same. What was remarkable from the article that I remember reading, the Guardian piece that you've got there, was that this employee was obviously tricked into joining, I think it was a video call, a video conference, and was greeted by not just one but dozens of colleagues at the organization with their real faces on this video call. And so the scale of this is absolutely fascinating. We're not talking about somebody recording a deep fake audio message and playing it back into a phone. We're not talking even about somebody, creating a deep fake video of somebody. We're talking about somebody creating, from the looks of it, dozens and dozens of fake videos of employees of the company, posting them, streaming them into, the boxes that you get when you join a video conference. And of course, when you join that as an employee, that looks super convincing, and the scale of that must have looked super convincing. And of course, then there would presumably be one of the videos of the chief executive, perhaps the chief financial officer, saying, "We need this to happen. Can you wire this money?" and sending them a message in the chat. Of course, there's always questions that arise out of it. This is an employee who's been tricked into joining a Zoom call. or some kind of online conference, video call, how would they tricked into doing that? Would they send an email? What was sort of engineering behind that? Because, to get the person to the point where they're joining the call and tricked to send the money, there seems to have been some methodology before that to get them to fall for that trick. That's not covered as far as I remember in the article, but unless I've got it wrong. But certainly, I mean, the scale of this, as I say, the creation of all of those personalities, I thought was really, really impressive and quite striking.
So, it is definitely very impressive, right? If we think about, this, that, potentially can happen and target multiple other companies and organizations. But I want to try to kind of counterbalance, the expectations about this kind of attacks, because it's true. The article says that there were multiple people in the video conference, tool. But I have, once again, just on a hypothesis. I don't have any data because we don't have the details here. But what if the number of people into the Zoom call were actually a way to make it a little more, let's say, reliable, or just a little more credible? What I mean is that maybe I really do not expect great video quality, right, for the deep fake, because we know it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of data and a lot of money to do it. But what if I, instead of just one image, I put in there 10 different images of 10 different people, maybe some of them even real people, so that when you see something that is not very high quality, you just exchange that for poor internet quality, which is something we see very very often in video conferencing. My point is that I don't see this very replicable. So I don't see this happening very often nowadays, right? We don't see this a lot in the news. And I think, as always with phishing, attackers are just trying to leverage on our biases, right? If I put in there the CEO or the CFO image, the pressure you have because you're talking with your CEO maybe will make you, not notice the quality of the deep fake, or the fact that, that's maybe not really your CEO, just because you have a lot of pressure with 10 people talking to you, and, this is a very big deal. You have to send the money and blah, 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 right? So I don't know, is that something that, makes sense for you?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think with all of these AI security stories and the AI security concern, the worries, the risks, the security risks, my response is always that I don't think we've seen as yet an at-scale use of AI by malicious actors. We're not seeing the kind of thing we see with ransomware, where it is a fully scaled up international developed business. It's an entire economy, ransomware, because you can do it at scale. With this kind of deepfake activity, it's hard, I think, to do it at scale, and certainly we're not seeing it done at scale. So it is, as you say, individual, quite carefully crafted, intensive phishing campaigns. What I would say is they got $20 million from the sounds of it. Is it 20 million pounds or dollars?
20 million pounds, yeah.
I mean, 20 minutes, how long would that would probably keep me the rest of my life. I mean, depends how much I spent, if I had an extravagant life. So yes, it's not going to be a common tactic, but the thieves only have to get away with it once to really, really make a huge payday. But I think you're absolutely right about the point about using multiple video streams. But the other thing is, this is what's infuriating about these stories is, as an investigative journalist, what I really want to know is what actually sort of happened. So put yourself in the position, the shoes of that employee logging on. Now, clearly you're an employee who's got the authority to send 20 million pounds, right? That's somebody reasonably high up in finance, or well positioned in finance. So it's not, a junior employee. It's somebody quite senior who logs in. You're confronted with this video call, and then what happens next? Did somebody impersonate the chief executive and say, by the way, we've got a big payment, John, can you make that payment? John, obviously being the victim, is logged in. And then how did they sort of get John to do that payment and talk them through it? There's a lot involved. Yes, it's deep fakes, and yes, it's AI, but the social engineering skill to get John or Kathy or whoever the employee was to make the 20 million payment, there's stuff behind. There's other things that went on behind that. We're not privy to those in this story. It's tantalizing.
Well, once again, I will assume that probably the video conference was not the only thing. I would assume that where to send those money. It was written maybe in an email, in a well-crafted, phishing email or something. Even though they had to send the link for the video conference, so of course they had a mean to actually contact via text or voice the person. So we don't have all the details, unfortunately. In this kind of cases, we probably never have. We're not going to ever have all of details. Of course, maybe if someone with doing your job is not going to write a book about it, maybe at some point we will have some more details. But yeah, it's definitely interesting. The ability to convince someone in that position, right? Because of course you have some responsibility on your shoulders if you can send that kind of money. To do that, and to just the wrong addresses, right? So it is interesting. My point is mostly that this is something that that it takes a lot of efforts, a lot of time to build it, and probably it's always going to be for very high, let's say, for very high results, like all of this money right now. I'm not expecting like random people receiving deepfake conference call to give them back, I don't know, $10,000, $5,000. That's my point, right? This is something very, very well crafted and targeted to high C-level people in big companies.
And exactly to that point, you've got to pick the right person in finance to target. As I say, somebody who's got the authority to transfer 20 million. That's a reconnaissance exercise. You've then got to work out who that person would talk to in the organization, so that when they log on to the video conference, the right people are in the room virtually. There's a lot of reconnaissance goes on around this to get that 20 million. As you say, time consuming, expensive, but a 20 million payday. So yeah.
Yeah, not bad. I mean, if you think about it, it's always pretty similar to any other phishing attack, right? Let's say that this was done in an era where we didn't have deepfake. Basically the kind of activities involved were always the same. So as you said, the recurrence phase, to understand who to target, who's going to be the right person to target to get that kind of money, and then to kind of monitor that person to understand what kind of people they interact with, from who they could receive an email, from which kind of address, and then eventually maybe how to craft the best email, or record a video or something that could convince the person to do that in a timely manner, right? Because the thing is that if they can push some urgency on you, you're not going to think too much about it. I think that's the thing. If you know, and this is social engineering, right? If you know what are the right biases to exploit, we're talking basically about human vulnerabilities. There's no trained person, there's no smart person who could not fall on it. Because I'm in the security industry, and still I think that anyone can fall for it if it's a good crafted, or if you're not in your best day, right? If you had something happening at home, or you have some big concerns in your mind, and you are just pushed to do something very quickly, you don't think about it. No matter how smart or how attentive you are.
Yeah, exactly. The AI here, the deep fakes, is just being used as an extra tool in what was already the kind of social engineering tactics, psychological tactics. But I'm fascinated by the quote from Arup, which says, "Our financial stability and business operations were not impacted." Now, financial stability, fine, they can probably afford, frankly, to lose 20 million, but the business processes were clearly affected. Your business process is people in your organization doing stuff for you. Well, that was affected. What they're saying is, look, we were still able to carry out engineering tasks and building tasks, fine. But your business processes is what really gets me about that is the business processes are exactly what the hackers want to know about. They want to know who in your organization authorizes money, how much money they authorize, who gives them the authorization to do that. That's a business process. It may not be out building buildings in the in the street, but it's part of your business processes. And the idea that Arup's response is, well, our business processes weren't affected. They really were. That's exactly what was affected, because that's what the hackers targeted. So a slightly disingenuous comment I felt there from Arup. But I mean, they lost 20 million. They are a victim of crime, and I do feel sorry for them. But I just felt that was giving away a little bit about how they thought about things, and I think they need to think about things a bit differently so as not to fall victim in future.
Well, that's something we very often discuss in the when any kind of data breach really happens for targeting any company. And the thing is, this is just part of PR, or just this is part of crisis management, if you want. So there's the technical part when you handle the technical incident, but of course there's some let's say reputation damage that you face as a company, and you need to do something. Of course, let's say this phrase right here doesn't mean anything really.
Yes,
but it's a way to counterbalance the reputation image for the big public, let's say. As a professional, I would say they have to do it. Do they mean something with it? I will not.
Yes,
I mean,
it will have been written by the lawyers, let's face it, Giorgio. But as I say, the language there was very telling. Our internal systems, none of our internal systems were compromised. Well, as I say, the internal system of how you approve money transfers is an internal system. So yeah, that was compromised. I know it doesn't really mean anything, but language is important, I think.
I think it depends on who is reading this, right? This is probably not for the people who know something about the our industry and how this stuff work, but it's more on their customers probably, who could be concerned about being impacted themselves about the thing. Most of the time that's the let's say that's the goal, to reassure that they were affected, but they contained the thing, or at least it was not worse than what it appears, and that's it. There's nothing else.
Yeah, we haven't lost your data. We're still able to serve you. That's fine. Yeah.
I mean, once again, as a professional, that's understandable, but I'm perfectly aware that it's not really meaningful, really. Okay, so well, deepfake, it's a very big thing. Once again, we discussed about AI, and I don't know. I would say, unfortunately, this is something I take in any episode, in every episode, in the last months, or in the last year, just because it's the next big thing, right? I will not like to talk always about the same thing, but this is what we need to be aware of, and this is what we have.
Keeps coming up.
Right now, I think we have a final news to talk about. It's not the the newest one compared to the others we already spoke about, but I really think this is probably the biggest one, in terms of impact, and on if you think about it, the consequences of something like this, especially if you think that this is probably not the only case of similar activity in the wild. Now let me introduce it. So this is the I think this is the U.S. the Justice Department of the United States, targeting few, actually, I think two people plus three others involved, but specifically the two people involved in this kind of, I don't know how to call it, a scam. Is it a scam? I don't know. This kind of operation, let's say, where they basically made some people and some engineers from North Korea to be hired in United States tech companies. They also mentioned some of the Fortune 500, so very big companies, to be hired as software engineers and similar jobs, into to be hired with the fake identities. It's not very clear for me whether they stole those identities or they crafted it from scratch. But either way, it's pretty interesting. And they basically worked for those companies for a lot of time and remotely, so technically from home, but not only remotely from the United States, actually working from North Korea and faking their online presence in the United States, because the woman here was taking all of the work laptops in their own home, while the engineers were actually connecting through it as a kind of proxy or relay to the company's environments. Now, it is very interesting that the Justice Department declared that this was done in order to where is it? I really want to quote it, to infiltrate job markets and raise revenue for the North Korean nuclear program. Now, this statement is pretty big, and I know that's probably a lot of intelligence behind this kind of statement. Still, it's like I struggle to see the direct connection, right? How do we know so clearly that that's the purpose? Because my point is, this is as a software engineer from North Korea, I will probably be motivated myself just for the money that I could get as getting a salary from the United States, medium or average, right? That's a big thing. But of course, I could also understand that if this is sponsored by the states, there could be a lot of money that the state itself could do for a lot of different reasons. Well, it's interesting on a lot of different levels. First of all, the companies not let's say detecting this kind of behavior from their own employees. We're talking about software engineers, people who are building your own softwares and tools and products you are actually selling. This is something that companies should monitor and at least understand from where they're really working, or what kind of software is running on their laptops. Because if I need to connect to that laptop, I need to use some kind of tool that gets me connected to it. So those laptops were not monitored in some way. And well, I need to stop here, otherwise I will talk alone. So once again, what are your first thoughts about this?
Yeah, this is an absolutely fascinating story. It's huge, and it's also terrifying for the companies involved, and companies that may not know they're involved might have been involved without having realized it. There's two bigger pictures that we need to look at here. One is COVID and the impact of the coronavirus pandemic, which obviously meant that lots of companies were allowing people to work from home and work remotely, and were just shipping laptops to people's homes to get them to work. So that working from home, remote working, obviously was happening already, was massively accelerated during COVID. So that's one thing to bear in mind with how this happened. The second thing to bear in mind is that North Korea, as a lot of your listeners and viewers will know, North Korea is under sanctions. So because it keeps testing nuclear weapons and launching missiles, it's been sealed off from the international community. And one of the things that the United Nations did a few years back was to ban North Korean workers from working overseas. Because North Koreans used to go abroad. There was a restaurant, I think it was in Sweden, I'm going to say, a North Korean restaurant where you could go and eat North Korean food served by North Korean people. North Koreans worked abroad quite a lot, logging in Russia and that kind of thing, construction work in China. The United Nations said, no, we don't want that to happen anymore, because we believe that those North Korean people working abroad are sending the money back to North Korea, and North Korea is spending it then on nuclear weapons and missiles and so on. And to go to your point, Giorgio, about the Department of Justice comment, they're saying this exercise, this campaign, which you've talked about, was to make money for North Korea and for its nuclear weapons program. Well, North Korea spends an inordinate amount, a disproportionate amount on the military, and therefore on nuclear weapons. These things are very expensive to build, to design, to launch. Inevitably, any money that goes into North Korea, the government is going to siphon off a chunk of it, and that's going to be spent, some of that's going to be spent on military stuff. So what happened here was the North Koreans have obviously thought to themselves, well, we used to go and work abroad. We used to get jobs in restaurants and stuff. We can't do that anymore. We used to get IT work abroad. There were North Korean IT workers working legitimately, not hackers, apparently, legitimate IT workers working abroad. That stopped. So I think what the North Koreans have thought to themselves is, well, if we can't get jobs legitimately abroad and we want to get them to make money, how do we do it? What they did apparently in this case, and we should say this is an accusation, it's an allegation against this woman, Christina Chapman. She's not been tried yet. This is an indictment, a criminal complaint. Apparently she was approached on LinkedIn by a bunch of people who said, we want to get work in the United States, but we can't really work there. Can you help us by, installing laptops in your home and allowing us to access the laptops to then do the job? Apparently, Christina Chapman said yes, according to the US government. We're yet to hear her defense and her side of this. What she then did was, as you say, she got identities of United States citizens, allegedly. These are real people living in the United States, and used those identities to apply for jobs. The employer, and this included Fortune 500 companies, a major auto manufacturer in Detroit, a major US clothing label based in California, big companies, Fortune 500 companies, would then hire what they thought were these remote workers who were real people. They would ship out a laptop saying, right, you're a remote worker now, here's your laptop. Apparently, this woman, Christina Chapman, would put the laptop in her house, connect it up, and then install remote access software that the North Koreans could use to dial into the laptop to then carry out the work for the company. Now, according to the US complaint, and again, this is an allegation, but it's something like $6 million of worth of money was made using this exercise. So that's money that goes back to North Korea, can potentially be spent on nuclear weapons. But over and above that, they actually stole data and sensitive information from these companies because they're given authorized access through the computer to access the company's systems. This is, as you said in the title of the podcast, insider threat, but next level. You've hired this person, give them access. God knows what they got access to, what passwords. And by the way, the fact that I'm sure these companies have been told by the Department of Justice, look, you hired John Smith or Jane Smith, turns out they were North Korean. I'm sure the company at that point would shut off their access. But if that individual had got passwords or credentials or logins, they are obviously going to be sacked as an employee, but that doesn't stop them logging back in later on with that password or that credential. These companies face a nightmare of working out what did this person have access to, what might they still have access to, and are they going to come back and hit us again? It's an absolutely extraordinary story. It's an amazing story. It's going to be an amazing court case, I think, if and when it comes to court.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, on that point, I didn't see this be shared a lot or be pushed a lot by the news sites actually compared to other news in the same week. But I anyway. So you actually mentioned, yeah, go.
So I was going to say, I think it's because it's not been written up very well. The Department of Justice haven't portrayed it very well, but it really is. I mean, the detail, if you haven't read the indictment, your viewers, your readers, you can find the Department of Justice accusations and just read through it. It's got a lot of detail about exactly how this was alleged to have gone down. And I suspect maybe that the news outlets have read the press release, but haven't read the indictment, which is where all the juicy stuff is, allegedly.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned a good point. So I'm going to post all of the articles in the description of the video, and all of the people watching or listening to this are encouraged to do their own research. We unfortunately do not have time to deep dive in everything, but you should if you're interested, and maybe let us know if there's something that we missed right here, so I can myself I can learn more from your point of views. Now, the most interesting thing for me was exactly the reason why I put that title in there, right? This is some kind of insider threat. Like, usually we refer as insider threat when your own employee, right, is convinced or for some reason really is trying to do something against the company. So he's maybe stealing some data, maybe it's installing himself some kind of malware because they already got access. They don't need to find out a way to get a foothold inside. They are already in. But this is, of course, slightly different. I mean, it's an external actor in some way that to get inside, they actually went through the selection process and hiring process. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. They became just later on insiders. Because they passed the screening test. Now, I mean, I will talk about this probably forever, like about the hiring process, right? How do you select the people? How did you not identify, the nationality? Maybe I will say that probably United States cannot, there should be some regulation to avoid hiring people from North Korea, right?
Oh,
So
yes.
they
That's absolutely.
hided it, right, some way. The other thing is, as I mentioned before, monitoring your own computer assets to identify whether there's any connection coming from unwanted, let's say, countries, or if there's any tool that is not allowed, like remote access tools that were probably used at this point. And you mentioned it. It's not only about the money. Of course, this is very important in this specific scenario, but how much data and I'm thinking about actually what's the word for it? I mean, code itself, products itself that
Yes.
could have been stalled, or just parts of it being collected by these actors. We're talking about here, it's talking about 800, more than 800 different identities being used. So I'm assuming that also potentially the number of people that were there, at some point could have been worked or will work for those companies from North Korea. How many of those companies will have their own data, stolen and collected for other purposes, right? I think even a defense company, it's involved from the United States, so that's a big thing.
It's interesting. So the points you talk about there in terms of recruitment. One interesting thing about this that I couldn't get from the indictment documents was how the pay worked, because yes, you can steal somebody's identity and you can create the perfect CV for the job. So when they apply for the job, the employer thinks, well, this person's just great, let's hire them. At that point, yes, well done, you've got the job. Can you give us your bank details? Now, you'd have to have the bank details, I presume, to match the name of the person, or maybe they set up an account in the name of a company. That'd be another way of doing it. So you have a corporate account and you say, well, I'm John Smith, I'm applying for this job, but can you play into my company account, which is, Smith Enterprises, and you set up. So maybe that's how they did it. Interestingly, one of the, so there's multiple breaches of multiple laws being alleged here in the US. There's a thing called IEEPA, which is the sanctions law against North Korea. So obviously helping North Korea get money, as this woman's alleged to have done, is an offense. But also the IRS, the Inland Revenue Service in the US, is going after this person because obviously the companies paid tax, but they paid tax to an individual who sort of didn't exist. So there's tax liabilities of a sort. In terms of your point about remote access and companies monitoring it, that's really difficult because in this case, the companies sent out their own laptop, a corporate laptop, to be based at this laptop farm that this woman was allegedly running. So what they would have seen on their logs would be incoming traffic, possibly via their own VPN, from their own issued laptop in the United States, being apparently run. Now, what's interesting, Giorgio, and actually, you raise a good point here, is if you can monitor the laptop and say, hang on, we provisioned this laptop and we sent it out to our new employee, Jane Smith, and then within 2 minutes of arriving, she'd installed some remote access software on it, and that's now running. There should have been things triggering, and it does make you wonder the kind of endpoint monitoring they would have had on these laptops, because why suddenly, if you install remote access software, and why is that being run? That possibly would have triggered the hint, but it seems the companies didn't have that in place. They sent out the laptops connected to the corporate network, and that's it. The employees working, let's start paying them. Just absolutely endlessly. This case is honestly, it's endlessly fascinating. We really, really need to know more about this and learn more about it. I am myself trying to sort of dig more into this and trying to, if I can, speak to people sort of connected with the case. But it is genuinely fascinating and ties into this whole ingenuity about how North Korea works. And one other thing I was going to mention, Giorgio, if you don't mind, is we actually covered a lot of this fake IT worker stuff in the podcast series I did for the BBC, The Lazarus Heist, and the book, which is this one up here, and which coincidentally happens to be on my bookshelf. Just coincidence there. One thing that we talked about in that series was North Korean IT workers getting jobs at cryptocurrency companies and crypto firms. Now, one of the terrifying things of them is you've inadvertently hired a North Korean who's been in your organization for a week, months, who knows. They've had access, obviously, to your internal system. So maybe they've got your passwords. Maybe they're just going to steal your cryptocurrency. Or, and this is the thing that's really terrifying, have they built in some kind of vulnerability or flaw into the code that you've developed, that they've deployed? so that when they've left the company years from now, they can trigger the vulnerability and wipe out your wallets and steal all the money. That's really terrifying. And again, with these companies they work for, in this case, these hundreds of US companies or dozens of US companies, have they left some vulnerability or some flaw in the company so that they can break in later on? You've got to, as soon as you've discovered an insider threat, you have to just dig into everything they've had access to and make sure they've not left any nasty surprises for you in the future. It's a fascinating story, genuinely fascinating story.
Jeff, please let me spend few words on this. I'm amazed on how much technical details you can let's say take from these stories. From a technical person, I recognized a lot of work behind that in order to understand how all of this. So really, kudos about that. And the fact that you mentioned about the fact that if these were software engineers, they could have probably built a backdoor themselves. In most of those companies, we don't know. We will probably never know at this point. And that's I didn't think about that in the first place. And it's actually probably the most concerning thing of it all, right? Because even though, let's say, they are discovered right now and they will make everything possible to stop it. I mean, identifying a backdoor in the code is something on a completely different level. It could be stay there for years potentially. And once again, if even companies from the defense space are involved, we don't know what's the scope of it yet.
Just to chime in quickly, by the way, this is one case of one person in the US. I've been told that there are multiple people in multiple countries, and I think the UK is one of them. Now, if you think about what's happening in the US with this woman, allegedly, it was US companies. So if there's somebody in the UK, that implies to me that they're targeting UK companies. If someone in Turkey, they'd be targeting Turkish companies and French companies. If you have a person in country who's helping you out with a laptop farm, that implies to me you're targeting companies in that country. So I don't think this is going to be the last case we're going to see. I think there's going to be a lot more, I think.
Yeah, I was about to mention exactly the same thing. And I'm even a little afraid, right? Because that's something that will definitely push companies against the remote working, which personally, I'm a big supporter. But I definitely understand at this point, right? Yeah. I usually have, most of the time, just ways to encourage remote working. You can have a diverse employee base. You can have a lot of more resources to use as a company. But this is very big. This is very concerning. And I myself want to know more about this. So I will keep an eye on similar news. And if you get to know something more, and you can tell me something, I will be most grateful. Sure. That said, Jeff, this has been very, very interesting. You don't know how much, but unfortunately our time, ended for today. Sure. I appreciate your time very much. You being here and talking about, what were your opinions. And once again, I just want to mention that keep an eye on Geoff books. They're very interesting. I will personally buy the new one while when we will be available. And just a reminder for everyone, this was live on the YouTube channel, but you're most welcome to go check on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all of the different audio platforms if you want to listen to it rather than watching it. And if you enjoyed it and you want us to continue doing this, maybe inviting more people, maybe Geoff once again at some point, if I can convince him, please consider subscribing and putting a like in there and maybe sharing it with your friend. And most of all, please consider leaving us a comment with all your own opinions, because that's what I'm really looking for. That's it. Thank you once again, Geoff. Thank you very much for all the people watching this, and see you in the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Cheerio. Bye-bye.